Does anyone remember the Xbox One, the generation where everybody was obsessed with frame rate, resolution, things like that? More resolution than I think with frame rate, but it was always a big topic of the day when resolution was talked about, because Xbox had some weird resolutions. Let's just be real about it. Like, to be honest with everybody, it was such a strange situation, because you would see 1080p a lot of the time on PlayStation, and then you would see something like 794p or 812p or something like that on Xbox One. So, it's just one of those things that, so many people kind of look at and kind of say to themselves, well, what's the deal with this? Like, when it comes into a new generation, I really think that it's one of those situations where, people don't really think these things through. Now, when it comes to the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S, obviously they took a little bit of a different tactic with it, and they're going all out with, trying to have a very good and affordable console, and they're also having the most powerful console as well as the cheapest entry point for people looking to just get into the generation, which I think is a very smart thing to do, and something that I've given them tons of prop for as well, because I think it just makes sense for them to do that. Now, at the end of the day, is that something that's going to really pay off for them? Is it going to be something that relatively looks good to people all around? I think that that's going to be a little bit of a question mark, right? Like, this is going to be part of the reason why people are kind of look at these things and go, well, is that going to be best for it? Now, Digital Foundry is out there talking about the Halo Infinite Season 2 update and what it's done for the Xbox. And unfortunately, when it comes down to VRR and frame rate pacing and the frame rate on the Series S, to be honest, it looks like that's kind of going to be a trouble spot, and I'm going to talk about how this has kind of changed things for Microsoft. Now, for me, if I had a Series S, I probably, that was my only console, because I have one, but it's just not my main console, I probably wouldn't be playing Halo Infinite at 120 frames. I mean, it's nice to have that option there, but let's just be real. I think maybe they stretched a little bit much by giving it that sort of, 120 frame buffer on that console. I think they should probably just stop at the 60 frames and try to get it as good as possible. So, when it comes to this new update, they say, let's start with the good stuff first. Halo Infinite makes a much better first impression on the Series X and the Series S, thanks to fixes the long-standing issues with the game's pre-rendered cutscenes. And after the patch, colors and black levels are now correct, and the pre-rendered video sequences play back with proper frame pacing, making it feel much more smooth and more polished as a result. This might not sound like a big deal, but this sequence cost a lot of money to make, and it's key to the game's initial storytelling, and for it to present the way that it did at launch is a mystery. Still, the problem's solved now, and the improvement is palpable. It looks right. The washed out look is gone, and the jerky playback issues are finally fixed. Cutscene playback, an issue they highlighted pre-launch and that Microsoft told us would be patched, has finally been fixed as well. This one is weird. Even if the game ran consistently at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, actual movement within the cutscene was very jerky and very off-putting, giving the illusion of a much lower performance level. The fix comes as a real relief because it greatly improves the visual quality of all the cutscenes, working nicely in common with smaller fixes like the prevention of light flickering when you fly out to do an open world mission. That said, one issue still remains. Facial animations of all types still play out at 30 frames per second, something that didn't occur in pre-release footage circa 2020. Hopefully this too can be fixed in an upcoming release so the cutscenes can look good. What's even more interesting is they go on to talk about the new graphical modes that have been added to the Xbox Series consoles. And while other modes have been renamed based on their frame rate targets, that means that the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S now each have 3 modes to choose from: 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and 120 frames per second. The Series S 120 frames per second mode actually debuted with the beta flight of the game, but disappeared for the launch. This actual mode achieves this target by dropping resolution considerably, although other settings like draw distance and effects usage stay the same. With this mode enabled, the game remains at a 540p internal resolution with variable rate shading, with the final image temporarily upscaled to 1080p. Unfortunately, this isn't a good fit for low resolution, as it can sometimes cause intense flickering and large macro blocks that are quite distracting. The image quality for the frame rate trade-off works well indoors though, especially in multiplayer, where action is more or less locked at 120 frames per second. But the open world sections of the game's campaign run at a juddery 70 to 90 frames. Drops to lower frame rates in action-packed moments or during rapid traversal can also occur, but it's clear that the mode delivers significantly higher frame rates than the 60 FPS mode, which is the name of the game. Series X also sees a 30 FPS mode, which caps the game's frame rate at 30 frames per second to ensure the highest possible internal resolution at any given moment. This mode still uses VRS, but it's less obvious due to the higher base resolution. In practice mode, this mode doesn't offer a massive visual difference compared to 60 FPS, and having the frame rate robs the game of a certain level of fluidity and responsiveness. The 30 frames per second mode also marks the return of our old nemesis in proper frame pacing. Frames aren't delivered at a regular interval, so you get persistent frame time spikes throughout play that break the stability of the mode that tries to achieve, ultimately rendering it redundant. Unfortunately, the 30 FPS mode on Series X isn't the only place that experiences frame pacing issues. In short, any mode that caps the frame rate below the refresh rate of your TV or monitor exhibits the same problem. Like playing a 60 FPS mode on a 4K 120Hz display would actually look worse than playing the game on a 60Hz or something that should never occur. The issue affects all Xbox consoles. So, following the Season 2 patch, Halo Infinite is in a better place than it was, with some long-standing issues finally resolved, even though several frustrating technical issues persist. Going down to 540p is definitely an issue for a quote-unquote next-gen console, but you have to remember that it's really a budgeted console and people have to kind of keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to what Microsoft can do in the future to make things even better, it's really kind of hard saying. They went from really kind of preaching about a 4K console with the Xbox One X to dropping down to, a less capable console in terms of resolution with the Series S. I think the Series S is a wonderful console, but again, is it a console that is going to keep a hardcore gamer happy this generation? I think that's the part where we kind of see some things fall apart a little bit. Having a game in 2022 drop down to 540p is pretty ridiculous, but I still think that Microsoft has a very good value proposition when it comes to the Series S, and the person who's playing that console probably isn't really that interested in the resolution to begin with. I mean, after all, many people play a Nintendo Switch, and those resolutions can get pretty low as well. I'm not sure if they drop down that low, but they can drop down significantly, and that's something that I think gamers just kind of that buy those don't really care one way or the other. So we'll see what happens in the future with this, but for Digital Foundry and people to be talking about this in the future, I guess we'll see what happens. I think it's interesting the way that they've kind of changed some things with Halo, and I think it's definitely interesting to see what the future will bring. I think that people are starting to finally understand and utilize what the PlayStation or what the Xbox Series S can do. It isn't as good as the Series X, but it's still a potent console, and the fact that they can get first-party stuff going in a 120 frames, that's incredible to me. Yes, I realize the resolution is a bit of a bummer, but what do you guys think about this? That's the important question. Do you think this is smart, or do you think it's not smart? Sound off. And if you watched the video, please leave a like. It helps the channel to be seen, and it helps the video to grow. Rack 'em up, fact 'em up, crap gamer 'em up. Crap gamer out.